So this video is going to cover Module 6 Homework 1, and now we're going to solve equations by factoring. Remember, solving means that you're trying to find x equals, or whatever the variable equals. So we're going to take factoring like we've been doing in Module 5 and take it that one step further. So our first example says solve m minus 6 times m plus 1 equals 0. So whenever it says solve, we're looking for our answer to be m equals. That's what I was thinking, m equals. So to solve these, notice it's already in factored form. So what we're going to do is we're going to set each factor equal to 0 and solve. Set each factor equal to 0 and then solve. So to notice this is in factored form. So it's already factored for us. So setting each factor equal to 0. So we have m minus 6. So m minus 6 equals 0. And we have m plus 1. So m plus 1 equals 0. So setting each factor equal to 0. And then now let's solve them each separately. So m minus 6. Let's get m by itself by adding 6 to both sides. Negative 6 plus 6 cancels out. We're left over with m equals 6. Then over here, minus 1 equals 0. Let's subtract 1 from both sides. That way 1 minus 1 cancels out. We're left with m equals negative 1. So those are our answers. M equals 6 and m equals negative 1. So in the homework, it'll tell you to put your answer using a comma separated list. So 6 comma negative 1. So that's how you would type it into your homework. All right, let's do this next one. The next one says solve the equation x squared plus 11x plus 28 equals 0. So this time it's not in factored form, it's in standard form. So we're going to need to factor it. I'm trying to think of what to do first. So, but notice it is in standard form. So remember, we have ax squared plus bx plus c, this time equals 0. This is our standard form. So now that it's in standard form, we can go ahead and factor. So let's go ahead and factor. Our first step in factoring, no matter what, is GCF, but there's nothing that x squared plus 11x plus 28 have in common, so no GCF. So a in front of x squared is positive 1, b in front of x is positive 11, c out by itself is 28. So we're looking for two numbers that multiply together to give us a times c, and the same two numbers to add together to give us b. So a times c, so 1 times 28, which is 28, and then b is 11. So what two numbers multiply together to give us 28 and add together to give us 11? 7 and 4. So 7 times 4 is 28. 7 plus 4 is 11. Thankfully, a is 1 here. So that means we can use our shortcut. A is 1. So we can use our shortcut. Our shortcut lets us go straight to our two factors. Set equal to 0 this time because it's equal to 0. Our variable's x. And our blank is positive 7, so that means x plus 7 is one factor. And our other blank is positive 4. So that means x plus 4 is our other factor. So x plus 7 times x plus 4 equals 0. So now that it's in factored form, just like we did up here, we can set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So set each factor equal to 0. And then solve. So our first factor is x plus 7, so x plus 7 equals 0. Our other factor is x plus 4, so x plus 4 equals 0. Solving each of them separately, x plus 7 equals 0. We can subtract 7 from both sides. That would give us x equals negative 7 as one answer. Over here, x plus 4 equals 0. We could subtract 4 from both sides. That way those cancel. We are left with x equals negative 4 as our other answer. So negative 7 and negative 4 are our two answers. In the homework, you would do negative 7 comma negative 4. Let's do the next one. Solve the equation p times p minus 4 equals 77. So look, this is not in standard form. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. It's not set to 0. So we have to put it in standard form. So let's distribute this p. So p times p would give us p squared. P times negative 4 would give us negative 4p equals 77. Next, we need to put this, move this 77 over. So let's subtract 77 from both sides. That way those cancel. So we're left with p squared minus 4p minus 77 equals 0. So now it's in standard form of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So pausing for a second, let's write that down. So put into standard form first. So got everything where it's an ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. This is our standard form. So now we can factor. So our first step in factoring, no matter what, is GCF. Oops. So p squared minus 4p minus 77. There's nothing that all three terms have in common, so no GCF. A in front of p squared is positive 1. B in front of p is negative 4. C out by itself is negative 77. So we're looking for two numbers that multiply together to give us A times C. The same two numbers to add together to give us B. So A times C. So 1 times negative 77 is negative 77. And then B is negative 4. So what two numbers multiply together to be negative 77 and add together to give me negative 4? 7 and 11 is what I'm thinking. In order to multiply together to give us negative 77, we know one's positive, one's negative. In order to add together to give me negative 4, we know the bigger number must be negative. So 11 is bigger than 7, so 11 should be negative. So negative 11 times positive 7 is negative 77. Negative 11 plus 7 is negative 4. All right, so great. So now here's the good part. A is 1, so we can use our shortcut again. A is 1, so we can use our shortcut. So our shortcut says we can go straight to our two factors, set equal to 0. Our variable in this case is p, and our blank is negative 11 and positive 7. So that means our two factors are p minus 11 and p plus 7 equals 0. So now we can set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So set each factor equal to 0 and then solve. So p minus 11 equals 0 and p plus 7 equals 0. Getting p by itself, we could add 11 to both sides. That way those cancel. We're left with p equals 11 as one answer. And then over here we could subtract 7 from both sides. That way those cancel. And we're left with p equals negative 7 as another answer. And that's it. The biggest thing that I see with these problems is people don't know, like, when do I factor? When do I keep going? So a couple things. For one, the problem says solve. Whenever it says solve, that means you're looking for p equals. You're looking for p equals. Also, there's an equal sign in the problem, so it's telling you to get p equals. It's telling you to get p by itself. So read the directions, because the directions tell you, what to do. So it tells you to solve, so it wants you to get p by itself. It wants you to get p equals. Versus something on module 5, there was not an equal sign in the problem, and it just said to factor. So you would just stop at your factoring. But because this says solve, we want to keep going to get p by itself. All right, next page. Markers all over my hands. All right, so solve 7x squared plus 33x minus 10 equals 0. Again, because of this solve, we are going to look for x equals. This is in standard form for us. This is in ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So that's already good to go. So we can go ahead and factor. Our first step in factoring, no matter what, is GCF, but there's no GCF to factor out of 7x squared plus 33x minus 10. So no GCF. A in front of x squared is positive 7. B in front of x is positive 33. C out by itself is negative 10. So we're looking for two numbers that multiply together to give us A times C, and the same two numbers to add together to give us B. So A times C, so 7 times negative 10, which is negative 70, and add together to give me B, which is 33. 2 and 35 is what I'm thinking. So if we do 2 and 35, and that might take you a minute to find that. So just because I found it so fast, I do these problems every day, all day. So it just takes practice of trying to figure out what goes into the blanks. So in order to multiply together to give me a negative, I know one's positive, one's negative. In order to add together to give me positive 33, that means the bigger number needs to be positive. 35 is bigger than 2, so 35 should be positive. Our 2 should be negative. So negative 2 times positive 35 is negative 70. Negative 2 plus 35 is positive 33. Unfortunately, we've been lucky so far, but A is 7, so that means A is not 1. So we must factor by grouping. So just going back to factor by grouping. Remember, factor by grouping means that we're going to use the numbers in our blank to split up this middle B term, to split up that 33x. So 7x squared is going to stay the same. We're going to split up 33x using the numbers in our blanks. So negative 2x and positive 35x minus 10 equals 0. Now we have 4 terms, so now we can factor by grouping. So group the first two, group the last two. Looking at our first two terms, 7x squared minus 2x, they both have an x in common. So we can factor or divide out that GCF of x. In doing so, we're left over with 7x minus 2. Looking at our next two terms, 35x minus 10, I know in the back of my mind I want 7x minus 2 to be left over. So that'll kind of help me see that my GCF should be positive 5. So factoring or dividing out that positive 5, we're left over with 7x minus 2 equals 0. So x times 7x minus 2 plus 5 times 7x minus 2. We know we did it right because they both have 7x minus 2 in common. So that will be one factor. Taking out our 7x minus 2, we're left over with x plus 5 as our other factor. So we factored it. So 7x minus 2 times x plus 5 equals 0. Remember though, this question says solve, so I have to keep going and I have to get x by itself. So we're going to set each factor equal to 0 and then solve. Set each factor equal to 0 and then solve. So 7x minus 2 equals 0 and x plus 5 equals 0. So getting each one solving each one separately. We could add 2 to both sides. That way our 2's cancel. We're left with 7x equals positive 2. Dividing by 7, those cancel. We are left over with x equals 2 over 7 as one answer. Over here, x plus 5 equals 0. We could subtract 5 from both sides. That way 5 minus 5 cancels out. And we're left over with x equals negative 5 as our other answer. So 2 over 7 and negative 5 are our 2 answers. Let's keep going. The next one says to solve 25x squared minus 49 equals 0. Remember, whenever it says solve, we're going to keep going to find x equals 25x squared minus 49. Look, before I even say that, let me go back. So this is in standard form. So this is set equal to 0. So it is in standard form. So that's good. I know it looks a little bit different. That's what I was talking about. That's why I was excited, because factoring will be easier for this one. So we want to go ahead and factor. Our first step in factoring, no matter what, is GCF. But looking at 25x squared minus 49, there's no GCF. So what I was saying was this one will be nice, though, because we are subtracting 2 perfect squares. So this is going to be a difference of perfect square. Yay! So our factoring shouldn't be too bad here. So difference, because we're subtracting. We're subtracting 2 perfect squares. So 2 perfect squares set equal to 0. 25x squared is, we know, 5x times 5x would give us 25x squared. We're subtracting, so we're going to have different signs. One's positive, one's negative. 49 is 7 times 7. So done, we factored it. 5x plus 7 times 5x minus 7 equals 0. So now we can set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So 5x plus 7 equals 0. 5x minus 7 equals 0. Solving each one separately. We can subtract 7 from both sides. 7 minus 7 cancels out. We're left over with 5x equals negative 7. Getting x by itself, we can divide by 5. Those cancel. We're left over with x equals negative 7 over 5 as one answer. Same thing over here, getting x by itself. We could add 7 to both sides. Those cancel. We have 5x equals 7. Dividing both sides by 5. 5's cancel. We're left with x equals positive 7/5. So our 2 answers are negative 7/5 and positive 7/5. We kept going till we got x equals, and we're done. Let's do this next one. So solving 36x squared plus 60x plus 25 equals 0. This is in standard form, so that's good to go. Of ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Standard form. So that means we can go ahead and factor. Our first step in factoring, no matter what, is GCF. But looking at 36x squared plus 60x plus 25, there's nothing that all 3 terms have in common, so no GCF. So a in front of x squared is 36, b in front of x is 60, c out by itself is 25. So big numbers, but we can do it. We're looking for 2 numbers that multiply together to give us a times c, and the same 2 numbers to add together to give us b. A times c, so 36 times 25, would give us 900. And b, which is 60. So what 2 numbers multiply together to give us 900 and add together to give us 60? 30 and 30. So 30 times 30 would give us 900. 30 plus 30 would give us 60. So that's good. So unfortunately here, a is not 1. So we must factor by grouping. Meaning we're going to use the numbers in our blanks to split up this middle 60x. So we have 36x squared. Instead of 60x, we're going to split it up using our numbers in our blanks. So plus 30x plus 30x plus 25 equals 0. So now we have 4 terms. So now we can group the first two, group the last two. Looking at our first two terms, 36x squared plus 30x GCF, they both have x in common, and they both have 6 in common. So let's factor or divide out 6x from both terms. Remember, you want to take out the GCF, so the largest thing they have in common, so 6x. We're left over with 6x plus 5. Looking at our next two terms, I know I want 6x plus 5 to be left over. So if we have 30x plus 25, GCF here looks like positive 5. So factoring or dividing out positive 5, we're left over with 6x plus 5 equals 0. We know we did it right because they both have 6x plus 5 in common. So 6x plus 5 is going to be one factor. Taking out that 6x plus 5, we're left over with 6x plus 5 again. So 6x plus 5 is one factor, 6x plus 5 is another factor equal to 0. Just like we did on special cases section, 6x plus 5 times 6x plus 5 can be rewritten as 6x plus 5 squared equals 0. So essentially, now we need to keep going and solving. We need to try to get x by itself. We need to try to get x equals. It's the same factor twice, so it's going to give us the same answer twice. So I only have to do it one time. So let's go ahead and say 6x plus 5 equals 0. So we can subtract 5 from both sides. That way our 5 minus 5 cancels out. So 6x equals negative 5. Dividing both sides by 6. Those cancel. We're left with x equals negative 5 over 6. Oops. Negative 5 over 6. So here we just have one answer, so it would be that same answer twice. I don't need to write it twice, though. One is sufficient. So x equals negative 5 over 6. Negative, I think I might have said that backwards, but negative 5 over 6 is our final answer. All right, next page. Getting closer. 4 more. All right, so these were kind of weird ones I wanted to make sure to go over. The last one was kind of weird too. So solve the equation p squared minus 12p equals 0. So this is set equal to 0. So it is in standard form. So set equal to 0. So it's in standard form. So that's good. That's done. So now our first step is to factor. Our GCF is always our first step in factoring no matter what. So p squared minus 12p. They both have a p in common. So our GCF would be p here. So I can factor or divide out p from both terms. So bringing that p out front, we're left over with p minus 12 equals 0. And that's as far as we can factor. We can't do anything else with p minus 12. So it's completely factored for us. So now what we're going to do is we're going to set each factor equal to 0 and then solve. So p times p minus 12. So p is a factor, so p equals 0. P minus 12 is another factor, so p minus 12 equals 0. P equals 0 is already one answer, so 0 is an answer. P minus 12 equals 0. We can add 12 to both sides, so that way our 12s cancel out. And we're left with P equals 12 as our other answer. So the question asked us to solve, the question asked us to find P equals, we did it. We found P equals 0 and P equals 12. So those are our two answers, 0 and 12. All right, so solve the equation. 20y cubed plus 17y squared plus 3y equals 0. So the question says solve, so we know we're going to try to find y equals. So first of all, this is in standard form because it said equal to 0, so that's good, that's done. It said equal to 0, so it's in standard form. So that's done. So then, because it's in standard form, we can go ahead and try to factor. Our first step in factoring, no matter what, is GCF. Looking at 20y cubed minus 17y squared plus 3y. Looks like they all have a y in common. So we have a GCF of y. So I can factor or divide out a y from all three terms. So bringing that GCF of y out front, we're left over with 20y squared minus 17y plus 3 equals 0. So just like before, y is already a factor, y is already an answer. So I'm going to go ahead and cover it up. It's already done. I'm just worried about now factoring 20y squared minus 17y plus 3. So a in front of y squared is positive 20. B in front of y is negative 17. C out by itself is 3. We're looking for two numbers that multiply together to give us a times c, and the same two numbers to add together to give us b. So a times c, so 20 times 3, which is 60, and add together to give us negative 17, which is b. I'm thinking 5 and 12 would give us 17 and 60. So let's see, 5 and 12. In order to multiply together to give us positive 60, they both have to be the same sign. In order to add together to be negative 17, that means they both need to be negative. So negative 5 plus negative 12, I'm sorry, negative 5 times negative 12 is 60. Negative 5 plus negative 12 is negative 17. So that's good, that's done. Unfortunately, A is 20, A is not 1. So we must factor by grouping. A is not 1, so we must factor by grouping. So that means we're going to use our numbers and our blanks to split up this middle negative 17y. So we have 20y squared. Instead of negative 17y, we're going to split it up using the numbers in our blanks. So negative 5y minus 12y plus 3. I guess we can go ahead and say equals 0. I'm just going to bring that down just so that we don't forget to keep going and set it equal to 0. So now we have 4 terms. So I can group the first two, group the last two. Looking at our first two terms, 20y squared minus 5y. So our GCF there should be 5y. So bringing that GCF of 5y out front, we're left over with 4y minus 1. Negative 5y divided by negative 5y is negative 1. Looking at our next two terms, negative 12y plus 3. I know I want 4y minus 1 to be left over. So in order to make it positive y minus 1, let's factor out negative 3. So we have to factor out negative 3 in this case. Negative 3, so that way it becomes negative 12y divided by negative 3 is positive 4y. Positive 3 divided by negative 1 is negative 1 equals 0. So that way we know we did it right because they both have 4y minus 1 in common. We have 5y times 4y minus 1 minus 3 times 4y minus 1. So they both have that 4y minus 1 in common, so we know we did it right. So that's going to be one factor, 4y minus 1. If we were to take out our 4y minus 1s, we're left over with our other factor of 5y minus 3. 5y minus 3 equals 0. So we factored it. So now don't forget to bring down this GCF of y. So there's completely factored. So y times 4y minus 1 times 5y minus 3 equals 0. Remember, if you were to multiply all the three of those factors back together, you get back to your original problem. So now that we have it in factored form, let's go ahead and set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So our first factor is y from our GCF. So y equals 0. So 0 is one answer. Our next factor is 4y minus 1 equals 0. So getting y by itself, we could add 1 to both sides. That way those cancel. So 4y equals 1. We can divide both sides by positive 4. That way 4's cancel. So we're left with y equals 1/4 as our next answer. Our last factor is 5y minus 3. So 5y minus 3 equals 0. We could add 3 to both sides. That way our 3's cancel out. We're left with 5y equals 3. And then lastly, getting y by itself, we can divide both sides by 5. That way those cancel. We're left with y equals 3/5. So we have 3 answers this time. And notice, whenever you see our highest exponent is 3, whatever this highest exponent is, it usually tells us how many answers there are. So because our highest exponent is 3, that'll tell us we have 3 answers. So in our homework, our 3 answers separated by a comma separated list would be 0, 1/4, 3/5. And that's it. Getting close to the end, let's solve the equation. 40y squared minus 34y plus 6 equals 0. It says solve, so we're looking for y equals at the very end. So solve is telling us to look for y equals. It is set equal to 0, so it's in standard form. So we can go ahead and try to factor it. Our first step in factoring is GCF. So looking at 40y squared minus 34y plus 6, looks like they all have a 2 in common. So our GCF is going to be 2. So factoring or dividing out 2 from all 3 terms. So that 2 comes out front. We're left over with 20y squared minus 34y divided by 2 would give us negative 17y. 6 divided by 2 would give us positive 3 equals 0. So this 2 is our GCF hanging out front. So our GCF of 2 is already done, so I'm going to kind of cover it up. What did you know? It's the same exact thing that we did up here. 20y squared minus 17y plus 3. So to save us all this time factoring, we know this factored down into 4y minus 1 and 5y minus 3. So 4y minus 1 times 5y minus 3. We factored the same exact thing right up here. So let me write that as a little note so that way we know that's where we got that from. So factored on previous example above. And then now, so bringing down this 2, don't forget to bring down that 2, equals 0. So we have 2 times 4y minus 1 times 5y minus 3 equals 0. So now we can set each factor equal to 0 and solve. All right, so we have 2 equals 0. We have 4y minus 1 equals 0. and we have 5y minus 3 equals 0. We're trying to get y equals. So if we have 2 equals 0, first of all, 2 is never going to equal 0. That tells us nothing about y, so we can't get y equals. So I don't even care about this one. So 4y minus 1 equals 0. We can add 1 to both sides. That way those cancel. 4y equals positive 1. Dividing both sides by 4. We're left with y equals 1 over 4. So that's done. 5y minus 3 equals 0. We're going to add 3 to both sides. That way those cancel. We're left over with 5y equals positive 3. Dividing by 5. 5's cancel. We're left with y equals 3 over 5 as our other answer. So even though we had 3 factors, we only had 2 answers. And then notice our highest exponent here is 2. So it tells us we should have 2 answers. So 1/4 is one answer, 3 over 5 is our other answer. So in your homework for this one, it would just be 1/4, 3/5. All right, last example on the last page. The width of a rectangle is 2 meters less than the length. If the area of the rectangle is 48 square meters, find the length and the width of the rectangle. All right, so a couple things here. First of all, let's draw a picture. So we have a rectangle. All right, so it says the width, which would be our W, of the rectangle equals 2 meters less than the length. So 2 meters less than the length. So whatever the length is minus 2 meters. So I know if this is the length of our rectangle, let's call that W, then our width we now know is L minus 2. So our width is L minus 2. The area of a rectangle is 48 square meters. So we know the area of a rectangle equals length times width. So it's telling us our length is 48. I'm sorry, our area is 48. Our area is 48. Our length is W. I'm like, ugh. Our area is 48. Our length is L. Our width, which is W, is L minus 2. So L times L minus 2. So we had a quadratic equation here. 48 equals L times L minus 2. Let's solve this thing. We always want to put it in standard form first. So put into standard form, which remember is set equal to 0. So let's distribute this L. So 48 equals L times L, which is L squared. L times negative 2, so negative 2L. And let's get it set equal to 0. So let's subtract 48 from both sides. That way those cancel. So we have 0 equals L squared minus 2L minus 48. And if you want to write it on the other side, that's fine too. So L squared minus 2L minus 48 equals 0. So it's now in standard form. So our standard form is AX squared plus BX plus C equals 0. So now we can factor. Our first step in factoring is GCF, but looking at L squared minus 2L minus W, there's no GCF. So A in front of L squared is positive 1, B in front of L is negative 2, C out by itself is negative 48. So we're looking for two numbers that multiply together to give us A times C, the same two numbers to add together to give us B. Oops. So A times C is 1 times negative 48, so negative 48, and B, which is negative 2. So what two numbers multiply together to give us negative 48 and add together to give us negative 2? 8 and 6. So let's see, 8 and 6. In order to multiply together to give us negative 48, one's positive, one's negative. In order to add together to give us negative 2, that means the bigger number is negative. So 8's bigger than 6, so A should be negative. So negative 8 times 6 is negative 48. Negative 8 plus 6 is negative 2. Thankfully, our A value here is 1. So we can use our shortcut, which is nice. So that means we can go straight to our two factors. Set equal to 0. Our variable here is L. And then in our blanks are negative 8. So L minus 8 is one factor. And positive 6. So L plus 6 is another factor. Setting each factor equal to 0 and solving, we get L minus 8 equals 0. L plus 6 equals 0. Getting L by itself, we can add 8 to both sides. That way those cancel. We're left with L equals 8. And then over here, let's subtract 6 from both sides. This would give us L equals negative 6. We have our length. Our length is negative 6. That doesn't make any sense. Length cannot be negative. So this is not an answer. So length cannot be negative. So not an answer. So our length is 8. Going back to the problem, it says square meters. So we know this length is in meters. So 8 meters. Also going back to the problem, it said find the length and the width. We know the width is L minus 2, is the length minus 2. So if we know our length is 8 meters, so this is our length. We know our width is L minus 2. So if our L is 8, 8 minus 2 would give us 6 meters. So our width is 6 meters. So our length is 8 meters and our width is 6 meters. Alrighty, and that is all of Module 6 Homework 1. If you have any questions, please let us know. If not, you can now complete your Module 6 Homework 1 homework assignment. If you have any questions, again, please let us know. If not, thank you for watching.